Learning a new language can be extremely rewarding and beneficial, not just from the practical skills that you gain from it, but also from a cognitive perspective, as it can also help stimulate parts of the brain that you're not used to stimulating, and some research has hinted that it can reduce the chances of you getting dementia later in life. Learning a new language though doesn't happen magically. It does require some time and effort. However, using the most modern and up-to-date approaches, you can make your life a whole lot easier and increase both the efficiency and the rate of your learning. So in this video, I'm going to share with you how I combine the most tried and tested techniques along with the most modern technologies in order to help me personally learn Italian. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to show you some specific examples how I incorporate AI into my language learning. So broadly speaking, if you want to be able to master any new language, or at least reach an acceptable level, you have to be able to cover and get relatively good at 4 different areas, which are reading, writing, speaking, and listening. But in any of these areas, if you want to be able to learn and retain information, then I think it's helpful to know roughly how your memory works and how to get the most out of it. So essentially, and contrary to common belief, your memory doesn't really work through repeated exposure. So if you keep seeing the same things or the same words over and over again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're guaranteed to absorb them. Instead, the foundation of your memory and how to strengthen it is through what is called repeated recall. So instead of trying to just see and immerse yourself in the same things over and over again, it's important that you go through the process of trying to recall them, remember them, recite them, depending on what that particular thing is. This is where the term active learning comes in, because it's not just good enough to be able to skim through a textbook and hope that you retain all of that information. Instead, you need to be able to practice or test yourself or put yourself in situations where it requires your brain to actually work through a particular problem and come up with some kind of conclusion or solution to the thing you're trying to translate or even remember. So when it comes to specific strategies or tactics to help with this active learning, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution. However, I do think that a language learning app is a good foundation to your overall progress. The reason why I say this is because the language learning apps excel in certain areas, and one of them is to build that kind of consistency, as usually it has the idea of streaks or regular practice built into the core idea of the app. So obviously I haven't tried every single language learning app out there, but I have tried a couple of the most common ones. So I'll go through each of those individually and kind of weigh up their pros and cons, and maybe that can help you decide which one is best suited to you. Starting with the most popular one, and Duolingo does a very good job of creating a very upbeat, playful, and enticing atmosphere to learn a language. They have a wide range of languages available, including even fictional languages such as Klingon and High Valerian. But the main thing is, with any language learning app, you can kind of go at your own pace, and they build in the structure necessary in order for you to be able to go from not learning a single word all the way to becoming very comfortable in that language. I think it is worth noting that it can be free to use, although to get the full benefits and to make that language learning a little bit smoother, it's probably worth paying for the premium subscription. The only other cons are that not all languages are necessarily prioritized to the same extent. So if your goal is to learn something like French or Spanish, then Duolingo provides a very complete and decent course in those languages. But if you want to learn a lesser known language and one that Duolingo hasn't fully prioritized, then it's only going to get you so far. I think it can also be a little bit repetitive at times, although this is quite common with most language learning apps. And in terms of understanding the rules of the language, you kind of need to infer them yourself, as it doesn't really go very deeply into explaining the formal rules of grammar and other areas. The app Memrise has a slightly different approach to helping you learn a language, and they put a lot more emphasis on the kind of practical aspects of a language. So they try to immerse you in language that you're more likely to use on a regular basis, so phrases and situations such as buying things from a shop or ordering food from a restaurant, rather than building things from the ground up in the way that Duolingo does. I think the benefits are that you're much more likely to understand some of the main sentences and phrases that you're likely to use, but have less understanding about how they're actually formed in the first place compared with Duolingo. I think one of the things that I really like is that it incorporates video footage from native speakers. So you'll be exposed to a variety of different accents and ways of talking, which can help you kind of build up a larger understanding of how words are actually pronounced, how they sound, and how different people actually speak them. I think there's probably a little less consistency in the different ways and deliveries that the content comes in, as well as the UI and experience overall, but it is a lot less expensive relative to Duolingo. So based on your own needs and the style that you prefer to learn in, then it actually might be the better option. And finally, we have the app Babbel, which I really like the way the content is structured, and they have a few really nice features that the other apps don't have. But I guess the biggest con is the fact that you can't try it out for free, or at least there isn't like a continuous free version of the app. Instead, it only really works if you have a premium subscription. So as I said previously, the language learning app, regardless of your choice, will become the foundation of your learning because it will force you to practice on a regular basis. You can go at your own pace, and usually it makes the whole process a little bit more fun and upbeat relative to learning from something like a textbook. But to get the most out of your learning, I think it helps to supplement this language learning app with something more formal. And you can either get this from a textbook itself or from an online resource. But really, because a lot of the apps help you with learning new words and how to use them, but they don't really help you as much understand the core of the grammar and how the language is structured. And this is where I think getting some supplementary information can really help accelerate your language learning. So one of the things I've started doing fairly recently is that 15 minutes to 30 minutes once per week, I will brush up on some of the rules of the language, the grammar, how the sentences are constructed, tenses, and so on, just so when it comes to you practicing on the apps, it'll kind of make a little bit more sense why some of the answers are the way they are, rather than you being kind of stuck in the dark and not really understanding where you went wrong. Another thing I like to do, which I personally find really helps, is in between while I'm doing other things, let's say going for a walk, imagine myself in real world situations or scenarios where I need to be able to speak that language and get to a particular goal. So it could be ordering something from a restaurant or asking someone where the bathroom is, and many other examples too. And this will kind of let you know where you're lacking in your current understanding, because in many ways, one of the things that really helps is that if you build your foundation on scenarios that you're likely to find yourself, you can then also play the other role and predict what the other person might say in response. And that way it kind of creates a two-way internal conversation where it solidifies your understanding, because you're able to essentially have a conversation with yourself from two different perspectives, and understanding both will be essential to thriving in this particular environment, because not only do you have to be able to say what you want, but also you have to be able to understand the other person. Then what I do is, if I'm unable to actually complete this conversation, I will note down some of the things that I'm trying to figure out. It could be specific words or phrases in English, and when I get a chance, I will look them up. And this creates a platform where the things that you're most likely to actually need are the things that you're actually focusing on. I have talked about this before in a previous video, but when it comes to learning, most of your learning happens through what is called anchors, or sometimes it's also called flag posts. So in order to be able to learn something, you have to go to somewhere in your memory that you already know. And this is the basis for any language learning too, because you can't understand what a new word is if you can't explain it using words that you already know. So overall, when you're trying to combine these two different components of learning, which are intentional learning, where you're trying to learn something specific in a very directed and conscious way, with the other aspect, which is repeated learning or repeated exposure and repeated recall, this is the area that's more like subconscious learning, because through this repetition, that's going to create the fast and automatic response that when someone asks you a question in that language, you're able to instinctively know how to respond. But the third thing that I like to do is to utilize AI and modern technologies in order to create some efficiencies in the learning, so that you're not just trying everything and trying to digest an entire textbook worth of information, but instead you're focusing on things that you're actually likely to need. Did you know that most native speakers have somewhere between 8,000 and 20,000 different words in their vocabulary, but to facilitate 80 to 90% of conversations, you probably only need somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000. So taking things a step further, you probably only need around 800 words to hold a basic conversation. And this is where AI comes in, because you can use AI to help you generate some of the most common words, verbs, and other useful tools. I'm now going to show you some examples how I use AI to optimize this learning. Here I ask ChatGPT to generate the most common verbs in Italian, as well as the different forms, so that you can kind of practice those, and they're the verbs that you're most likely to use on a regular basis. And then what I do is I ask it to generate this data in a CSV format so that I can convert this and paste it into my own phone's Notes app. You can also ask it specific questions about scenarios where you've gone wrong, and you might not be sure why a sentence appears the way it does and why a particular rule applies the way it does, or there might be scenarios where a rule applies in one form but not in another. And this is where asking specific questions to ChatGPT or any AI system can almost provide a tutor-like experience, because the problem with language learning apps typically is that they don't really provide any curated or tailored feedback. But if you can make use of ChatGPT, then it can tell you the most likely scenarios where you've gone wrong, why you've gone wrong, and some actionable steps in order to improve. Once you've blended together all of these approaches and you really feel like you understand the fundamentals of the language, then the next thing really to do is to give yourself greater exposure. And one of the best techniques for this is to find content that you're already somewhat familiar with. So this could be movies or TV shows, and change the language or the settings. You can even add subtitles if you want. And I think this is one of the best things, because it kind of exposes you to both the language in written form if you use subtitles, but also the language in a audible form, which I think is one of the things that is most practical and applicable. But when you go to a new country, most of your needs will be in a spoken form. So that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, then feel free to give it a like, subscribe, leave a comment down below. If there's any areas that you feel like I haven't covered, then definitely leave some feedback in the comment section. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.